Zia nodded. As we walked down the hall, we saw workers building the first step pyramid out of stone. Another few steps and the biggest pyramid of all rose from the desert at Giza. Its outer layer of smooth white casing stones gleamed in the sun. 10,000 workers gathered at its base and knelt before the pharaoh, who raised his hands to the sun, dedicating his own tomb. Khufu, I said. The baboon? Sadie asked, suddenly interested. No, the pharaoh who built the Great Pyramid, I said. It was the tallest structure in the world for almost 4,000 years. Another few steps and the images turned from silver to coppery. The Middle Kingdom, Zia announced. A bloody, chaotic time, and yet this is when the House of Life came to maturity. The scenes shifted more rapidly. We watched armies fighting, temples being built, ships sailing on the Nile, and magicians throwing fire. Every step covered hundreds of years, and yet the hall still went on forever. For the first time I understood just how ancient Egypt was. We crossed another threshold, and the light turned bronze. The new kingdom, I guessed, the last time Egypt was ruled by Egyptians. Zia said nothing, but I watched scenes passing that my dad had described to me. Hatshepsut, the greatest female pharaoh, putting on a fake beard and ruling Egypt as a man. Ramesses the Great leading his chariots into battle. I saw magicians dueling in a palace. A man in tattered robes with a shaggy black beard and wild eyes threw down his staff, which turned into a serpent and devoured a dozen other snakes. I got a lump in my throat. Is that Musa? Zia said. Or Moshi, as his own people knew him. You call him Moses. He's the only foreigner ever to defeat a house in a magic duel. I stared at her. You're kidding, right? We would not kid about such a thing. The scene shifted again. I saw a man standing over a table of battle figurines, wooden toy ships, soldiers and chariots. The man was dressed like a pharaoh, but his face looked oddly familiar. He looked up and seemed to smile right at me. With a chill, I realized he had the same face as the bar, the bird-faced spirit who challenged me on the bridge. Who is that? I asked. Nectanebo II, Zia said. It's the last native Egyptian king, and the last sorcerer pharaoh. He could move entire armies, create or destroy navies by moving pieces on his board. But in the end, it was not enough. We stepped over another line, and the images shimmered blue. These are Ptolemaic times, Zia said. Alexander the Great conquered the known world, including Egypt. He set up his general Ptolemy as a new pharaoh and founded a line of Greek kings to rule over Egypt. The Ptolemaic section of the hall was shorter and seemed sad compared to all the others. The temples were smaller, the kings and queens looked desperate or lazy or simply apathetic. There were no great battles, except towards the end. I saw Romans march into the city of Alexandria. I saw a woman with dark hair and a white dress drop a snake into her blouse. Cleopatra, Zia said, is the seventh queen of that time. She tried to stand against the might of Rome, and she lost. When she took her life, the last line of pharaohs ended. Egypt, as a great nation, faded. Our language was forgotten. The ancient rites were suppressed. The House of Life survived, but we were forced into hiding. We passed into an area of red light, and history began to look familiar. I saw Arab armies riding into Egypt, then the Turks. Napoleon marched his army under the shadow of the pyramids. The British came and built the Suez Canal. Slowly Cairo grew into a modern city, and the old ruins faded further and further under the sands of the desert. Each year, Zia said, the Hall of Ages grows to encompass our history, up until the present. I was so dazed I didn't even realize we'd reached the end of the hall until Sadie grabbed my arm. In front of us stood a dais, and on it an empty throne, a gilded wooden chair with a flail and a shepherd's crook carved in the back, the ancient symbols of the pharaoh. On the step below the throne sat the oldest man I'd ever seen. His skin was like lunch bag paper, brown, thin and crinkled. White linen robes hung loosely off his small frame. A leopard skin was draped around his shoulders, and his hands shakily held a big wooden staff, which I was sure he was going to drop any minute. But weirdest of all, the glowing hieroglyphs in the air seemed to be coming from him. Multicoloured symbols popped up all around him and floated away as if he were some sort of magic bubble machine. At first I wasn't sure he was even alive. His milky eyes stared into space. Then he focused on me, and electricity coursed through my body. He wasn't just looking at me, he was scanning me, reading my entire being. Hide, something inside me said. I didn't know where the voice came from, but my stomach clenched. My whole body tensed as if I were bracing for a hit, and the electrical feeling subsided. The old man raised an eyebrow, as if I'd surprised him, glanced behind him and said something in a language I didn't recognize. The second man stepped out of the shadows. I wanted to yelp. He was the guy who'd been with Zia in the British Museum, the one with the cream-coloured robes and forked beard. The bearded man glared at Sadie and me. I am Desjardins, he said with a French accent. My master, Chief Lector Iskander, welcomes you to the House of Life. I couldn't think what to say to that, so of course I asked a stupid question. He's really old. Why isn't he sitting on the throne? Desjardins' nostrils flared, but the old Duke Iskander just chuckled and said something else in that other language. Desjardins translated stiffly. The master says, thank you for noticing. He is in fact really old. But the throne is for the pharaoh. It has been vacant since the fall of Egypt to Rome. It is, comment disons, symbolic. The chief lector's role is to serve and protect the pharaoh. Therefore, he sits at the foot of the throne. I looked at Iskander a little nervously. I wondered how many years he'd been sitting on that step. If he can understand English, what language is he speaking? Desjardins sniffed. The chief lector understands many things, but he prefers to speak Alexandrian Greek, his birth tongue. Sadie cleared her throat. Sorry, his birth tongue? Wasn't Alexander the Great way back in the blue section, thousands of years ago? Make it sound like Lord Salamander is. Lord Iskander, Desjardins hissed. Show respect. Something clicked in my mind. Back in Brooklyn, Amos had talked about the magician's law against summoning gods, a law made in Roman times by the chief lector, Iskander. Surely it had to be a different guy. Maybe we were talking to Iskander the 27th or something. The old man looked at me in the eyes. He smiled as if he knew exactly what I was thinking. He said something else in Greek, and Desjardins translated. The master says not to worry. You will not be held responsible for the past crimes of your family, at least not until we have investigated you further. Gee, thanks, I said. Do not mock our generosity, boy, Desjardins warned. Your father broke our most important law twice. One of Cleopatra's Needle when he tried to summon the gods, and your mother died assisting him. Then again at the British Museum, when your father was foolish enough to use the Rosetta Stone itself. Now your uncle, too, is missing. You know what's happened to Amos? Sadie blurted out. Desjardins scowled. Not yet, he admitted. You have to find him, Sadie cried. Don't you have some sort of GPS magic or... We are searching, Desjardins said. But you cannot worry about Amos. You must stay here. You must be trained. I got the impression he was going to say a different word, something not as nice as trained. Iskander spoke directly to me. His tone sounded kindly. The master warns that the demon days begin tomorrow at sunset, Desjardins translated. You must be kept safe. But we have to find our dad, I said. Dangerous gods are on the loose out there. We saw Circuit and Set. At these names, Iskander's expression tightened. He turned and gave Desjardins what sounded like an order. Desjardins protested. Iskander repeated his statement. Desjardins clearly didn't like it, but he bowed to his master. Then he turned towards me. The chief lector wishes to hear your story. So I told him, with Sadie jumping in whenever I stopped to take a breath. Funny thing was, we both left out certain things without planning to. We didn't mention Sadie's magic abilities, or the encounter with the bar who called me a king. It was like I literally couldn't mention those things. Whenever I tried, the voice inside my head whispered, be silent. When I was done, I glanced at Zia. She said nothing, but she was studying me with a troubled expression. Iskander traced a circle on the step with the butt of his staff. More hieroglyphs popped into the air and floated away. After several seconds, Desjardins seemed to grow impatient. He stepped forward and glared at us. You are lying. That could not have been said. He would need a powerful host to remain in this world. Very powerful. Look, you, Sadie said. I don't know what all this rubbish is about a host, but I saw Set with my own eyes. You were there at the British Museum. You must have done too. And if Carter saw him in Phoenix, Arizona, then... She looked at me doubtfully. Then he's probably not crazy. Thanks, sis, I mumbled, but Sadie was just getting started. And as for Circuit, she's real too. Our friend, my cat Bass, died protecting us. So, Desjardins said coldly, you admit to consorting with the gods. That makes our investigation much easier. Bast is not your friend. The gods caused the downfall of Egypt. It is forbidden to call on their powers. Magicians are sworn to keep the gods from interfering in the mortal world. We must use all our power to fight them. Bast said you were paranoid, Sadie added. The magician clenched his fist, and the air tingled with the weird smell of ozone, like during a thunderstorm. The hairs on my neck stood straight up. Before anything bad could happen, Zia stepped in front of us. Lord Desjardins, she pleaded. There was something strange. When I ensnared the scorpion's goddess, she reformed almost instantly. I could not return her to the duat, even with the 7 ribbons. I could only break her hold on the host for a moment. Perhaps the rumors of other escapes. What other escapes? I asked. She glanced at me reluctantly. Other gods, many of them released since last night, from artifacts all over the world, like a chain reaction. Zia, Desjardins snapped. That information is not for sharing. Look, I said, Lord, sir, whatever Bast warned us this would happen, she said Set would release more gods. Master, Zia pleaded, if Ma'at is weakening, if Set is increasing chaos, perhaps that is why I could not banish Circuit. Ridiculous, Desjardins said. You are skilled, Zia, but perhaps you were not skilled enough for this encounter, and as for these two, the contamination must be contained. Zia's face reddened. She turned her attention to Iskander. Master, please, give me a chance with them. You forget your place, Desjardins snapped. These two are guilty and must be destroyed. My throat started closing up. I looked at Sadie. We had to make a run for it down that long hall. I didn't like our chances. The old man finally looked up. He smiled at Zia with true affection. For a second I wondered if she were his great-great-great-granddaughter or something. He spoke in Greek, and Zia bowed deeply. Desjardins looked ready to explode. He swept his robes away from his feet and marched behind the throne. The chief lector will allow Zia to test you, he growled. Meanwhile, I will seek out the truth, or the lies in your story. You will be punished for the lies. I turned to Iskander and copied Zia's bow. Sadie did the same. Thank you, Master, I said. The old man studied me for a long time. Again, I felt as if he were trying to burn into my soul, not in an angry way, more out of concern. Then he mumbled something, and I understood 2 words, Nectanebo and Bar. He opened his hand, and a flood of glowing hieroglyphs poured out, swarming around the dais. There was a blinding flash of light, and when I could see again, the dais was empty. The 2 men were gone. Zia turned towards us, her expression grim. I will show you to your quarters. In the morning, your testing begins. We will see what magic you know, and how you know it. I wasn't sure what she meant by that, but I exchanged an uneasy look with Sadie. Sounds fun, Sadie ventured. And if we fail this test? Zia regarded her coldly. This is not the sort of test you fail, Sadie Kane. You pass or you die. 15. A godly birthday party. They took Carter to a different dormitory, so I don't know how he slept, but I couldn't get a wink. It would have been hard enough with Zia's comments about passing our tests or dying, but the girls' dormitory just wasn't as posh as Amos's mansion. The stone walls sweated moisture. Creepy pictures of Egyptian monsters danced across the ceiling in the torchlight. I got a floating cot to sleep in, and the other girls in training, initiates Zia had called them, were much younger than me. So when the old dorm matron told them to go to sleep straight away, they actually obeyed. The matron waved her hand, and the torches went out. She shut the door behind her, and I could hear the sound of locks clicking. Lovely. Imprisoned in a nursery school dungeon. I stared into the dark until I heard the other girls snoring. A single thought kept bothering me, an urge I just couldn't shake. Finally, I crept out of bed and tugged on my boots.